a very warm welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Norwegian Business Association in Singapore. We are today having participation from Norway, Australia, and even in the US. So a very warm welcome to you all in the time zones you operate. We are going to cover a very exciting topic, and a topic that's been in media the past few weeks. We didn't really time it that way, so that's Trump's credit in a way, that it was brought up and presented to us in the way it's now in media. So we have 60 minutes to cover a relatively exciting topic on super apps and how will this development in super app impact the future of FinTech. We thank DNB for being our good sponsor. Thank you very much. Today we have a very competent panel with us. Berit Svendsen, she joins us from Oslo. Berit is the former head of Telenor Norway and currently leads the international expansion of Vipps. Warren T is an entrepreneur and focusing on helping companies globally wanting to get traction in China. He is also a Wechat expert and focused on super app development. Joachim Bråten have extensive experience from developing digital payment solutions in Europe and Asia. He is currently with GrabPay, where he is scaling the super app for growth in Southeast Asia. Frederic Giraud is the research director at Forrester Research. Frederic helps companies and CEOs navigate and make choices when it comes to strategy, and with special focus on how technology changes impact the choices leaders have to make in today's relatively complex setting. So we get into the questions, and the chat line is open, so I encourage everyone to send questions to our expert panel. If I could start with Berit, do you think that we are entering a new era with not just one great firewall in China, but a firewall in the US as well, and Europe stuck in the middle? Will we from here onward see that FinTech and super app developers, in particular in the US and China, have to move away from the ambition of developing global solutions and have to narrow it down towards geographical focus? And a second question for you at the same time: how can FinTech and super app developers in Europe capitalize on the current tech war and be positioned to be alternatives in the current market situation?
You know, what is going on there is a digital fight is the fight for digital hegemony. I have a lot of echo on my line right now. Is it a problem for you? No, it's better.
We hear you clearly.
Yeah, good. Oh, what's going on out there between US and China is the fight for digital hegemony. And that has been going on for a while, and it's scaling up. So I think, you know, China is better in some areas like mobile 5G, mobile payment. On AI, they will be much better. But US still have truly global companies that China doesn't have in the same matter. And I think, you know, that war will go on for a while, but I still hope that we can come to solutions, that we will not get into a splintered internet, that we will have really problems with creating good business across the world. Regarding Europe, yes, I can see that there is a chance of falling behind because of these superpowers. They are big, they have a lot of resources. Europe is a lot of separate countries, but there are some good things. If we look at the Nordic countries, we are one of the most advanced nations in the world regarding digitization. In Norway, it's only 4% of the financial transactions right now that are cash-based. In Germany, it's over 70%. In the Nordic countries, we all have a national electronic ID that is a digital copy of the passport. And in Norway, you can even sit in your sofa in your home and get divorced without leaving your sofa. And you can even buy a new property. So it's a lot of public services that have been digitized because we all have this digital ID. So I think there is a window of opportunity for the players in the Nordic and in Europe to scale up, but the only way to compete with the US players and the Chinese players is to scale up and get a lot of customers. And there is a small window of opportunity. I think the time is there right now, but we have a chance to do it.
Thank you, Berit. Warren, do you have any immediate comments to that from your perspective in Asia?
Well, in China, we can't really, we still got to go to law firm to settle this. So I think Norway is faster, more advanced in that sense. All right, I believe that when you look at these two big countries, when they fight and we all suffer, but of course from there's also created a good opportunity, just like right now. I think if without the COVID, without trade war, today we are not here using Zoom to make very often kind of meeting. So good and bad about both sides. I agree with Barry that you talk about mobile payment, 5G, AI, China is leading, and at the same time we talk global company, US are having the most. However, I will say that these two countries can't gel due to there's a lot of differentiation. So to me, when I look at the future trend is, there will be two kind of world, same, the East and the West, So the East, of course, we talk about China by itself, because China by itself is already very much influenced to a lot of countries, including like ASEAN country. This is why I travel a lot to other ASEAN countries as well, just doing business using leverage on Wechat, So this is something very interesting. So as a business people, I will say that we don't really bother much by, who versus who, because of political game, those kind of things. So the most important thing is which app in our favor, let's use the app. I think that would be more rational in that sense.
Sure. So my follow-up question, Warren, comes to you, and is a little bit focused on WeChat, because it's been in media quite a bit. So I'm not sure if all our listeners globally really know what WeChat is all about, but just a brief summary from me, so that you can use one app. You can order a taxi, you can order food, you can book a seat at the restaurant, you can book your cinema tickets, hairdresser, and afterwards you can rank all these experiences. You can book pet grooming, travel, hotels, airlines, and at the same time pay for all these services through the same app. You can have your phone calls, video calls, conference calls. You can read the latest news. You might also propose to your girlfriend or file for a divorce while you're at it. Basically all your life's needs within one app. It's dramatic shift within China, right, when it comes to consumers and how they behave. And how do you see this impacting traditional banking and telecom industries, for example? That's one question for you. And the second one is, do you think that the same adaptation as we've seen in China would also be seen globally or in Asia? How do you see this moving forward?
All right, when talk about banking and telco, in fact, big player like Tencent, who own WeChat, and Alibaba, we all know that they themselves act as a financial institution. In fact, they are a threat for China banking right now. Okay, likewise, just like, our dear friend who are using Grab, it's the same thing. So basically, the bank forced to work with company like Tencent, who own WeChat, to do this. And one of the big shifts is talking about taking a loans. We all take loans, be it for personal or for company. In the past, I believe for most of the countries it's the same, it included Singapore. In the past, when you want to take loans, if a personal loan, you will need to have your salary for maybe for the last 6 months, your last year income tax to prove that you are able to pay. You know, you are able to pay for the loans and loan amount, all those kind of things. Likewise to the company, it's the same thing. Well, in China, company like Tencent, Wechat, they do have their financial service. So what they do not judge based on how much you make. They based on how much can you spend. Because when you look at the China phenomenon, is Chinese, they pay things through in advance, they prepaid. So it's not like us, we use credit card, so we live on credit. Well, but for the Chinese, everything they gotta pay first, pay in advance. So for Chinese itself, nowadays when they want to borrow money from WeChat just need to base on their spending behavior to decide how much they can loan to these people, and it's just with a split second. So does it affect bank? Yes, it affects bank a lot, you see. And WeChat gateway, we all know that China are cashless society now. So either people using WeChat Pay or Alipay, these two are the dominant player on that. So how it works is the Chinese, they will link their WeChat wallets to the bank. So if their wallet have money, it's just like a top-up card. So the value over there, they can spend, and assume that if their top-up card have not enough money, then they can transfer their bank side. So WeChat itself, I will say that right now, is just for itself just like a bank. You know, you can borrow money, you can spend money, you can have credit, all those kind of things. So this is one of the very interesting thing in China phenomenon right now. And back to, if you want to talk about the adapting of the, what's your second question again? Your second question is?
So if we can see the same adaptation in the rest of Asia, maybe globally, as we're now seeing in China, or is this a very Chinese based development?
It's still very Chinese. The reason being is every country are different, and China, if you look at it, China is very close-minded country. This is why that they set up a lot of firewall, like what you all know. You can't use Google there, you can't use Facebook there. Whatever you're so used to it, you can't use over there. So you can't gel chopstick with fork and spoon. This is why I always share with people, you know. So if you want to deal with Chinese, sad to say that you can be very localized to, you know, deal with their way of doing things. So I don't think they were able to become a global player because of that, due to their mindset, you know. But of course, the other hand is for those Chinese who travel overseas, who expand their business, they are much more open. So they may make a difference from that. But when you talk about enter into China market, sad to say that it's still very challenging due to the culture different and the regulators are very different from that. From what
Thank you, Warren. So let me go to Joachim, because you've been in a position where you've been working both in Europe and in US and Asia with FinTech development. And I'm curious to hear how you see the developments and differences. You are now focused on the Asian markets. How do you evaluate what is happening globally in both super apps and FinTech? Will it become increasingly difficult to develop truly global FinTech based on what we already have discussed? Or is there still a lot of blue oceans of opportunities within FinTech?
Yeah, so I think it's generally going to be difficult to scale a FinTech company globally. And as Warren was getting into, so the customer needs in China are very different from the customer needs here in Southeast Asia, and also very different from the customer needs in Norway and the US and the rest of the world, right? So if you have a FinTech product that has done very well in a particular market or region, that doesn't necessarily mean that that same product will have the same success in other parts of the world, right? You need to know your customers and you need to solve the specific problems that those customers have. So for Norway, which is a very banked, highly carded population, access to credit is very simple. Some would say it's too simple even. And we have bank ID, super easy to validate who you are. Those problems have been solved in a sense in Norway, so there's other problems to tackle. Here in Southeast Asia, there's fewer people with cards, fewer people who are banked, so that presents a huge opportunity to solve those problems, perhaps in a slightly different way that we have done in Europe. And it seems that one of the characteristics of Asia particularly is that those problems are solved mainly through apps.
Thank you. We'll come a little bit back to this later on in the discussion, but Fredrik, I'm a bit curious to hear from you as well, because your company is working on something very exciting and very customer-centric approaches in many ways. I guess Amazon is the most customer-obsessed organization in the world, and they very early on incorporated ease of payment and FinTech in their solutions. How do you and Forrester see the future of FinTech, and how should traditional companies operating, for example, within shipping and energy industries, better capitalize on the opportunities to improve profit margins by leveraging on FinTech? How do you see that, Fredrik?
Yeah, and before I answer the question, I think Joachim raised a very important point in terms of the importance of understanding local customer needs and behaviors, and that's why at Forrester we talk about customer obsession, right? That as the only source of competitive advantage. It's really what differentiate companies that have a winning strategy versus the ones that are losing, right? If they are able to really understand the needs, the fast-changing needs of behaviors, and behaviors of customers, they have a chance of winning their business, right, and keeping their business, retaining the business. The other thing I wanted to add on what Joachim said, and I don't think this idea of a global FinTech really exists. I don't think there's, maybe except for Swift, which is this interbank messaging service, right? There's no such thing as a global FinTech, right? And that's why, if I look at the B2B space and, cross-border payments, for instance, leveraging blockchain, which, is still a very hot topic for central banks. The technology works, and the standards have been developed. If you think about Jasper Ubin standards, for instance, that was co-developed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the Bank of Canada. But the real problem is that the value chain is extremely complex, right? And the value chain is extremely fragmented as well. And in order for these type of technology to be adopted, you need to pretty much convince every actor, every stakeholder in the value chain to use the same standard, to use the same technology, and that's an uphill battle. So to go back to your question, in the shipping industry, same thing. We're seeing quite a bit of activity around digitizing the supply chain, and obviously shipping industry is a very important role to play in that digitization efforts. And blockchain sometimes is mentioned as the technology that will be used as part of these initiatives. But same thing, for these to work, you actually need to ensure that all the multiple parties, the importers, the exporters, the banks, the shipping companies, everybody needs to agree on using the same standards, using the same technology, and that's going to take some time, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So if we could go back to Norway and to Berit, you have had a lot of exciting traction with DIPS. How do you see the next 2 years for WIPS? What's going to be the key priorities, and what markets are you going to conquer? And how do you see the market in general developing there?
In WIPS, we will go internationally. And we have, the main focus in the first round, as we see it right now, I think will be Europe. But as Fredrik mentioned, there are a lot of different user needs, a lot of different regulations in the different countries in Europe. So it's not easy to scale up either. We have, for 1.5 years, tried to find a way forward. We have experienced, we have learned, we have tried to go into a country without succeeding. And now I think we have found a way forward, and our way, we need to scale up very quickly within a country. How to get lot of distribution, and how to scale between countries. These are two main points that we will focus on. And we are going to contribute to digitization within a country. And as we see it now, we will provide bank-friendly solutions. So banks can use WIPs as a tool for competing with the big global players. And we know that this can be a little bit cumbersome in Europe because in the Nordics, the banks has been cooperating for so many years. That's why we are so advanced in digital financial transactions, digital IDs, and to get banks to cooperate is quite hardly. And that's why there are a lot of cash still around in Europe, not so much digitization, but we think we can do it. And we have a very, let me say, very good approach going forward. We think we have. It's a little bit early for me to tell you more about it, but in the next webinar, I think we can say a lot more.
Thank you very much. And again, we congratulate you with the good traction that you're having. It's truly amazing. Warren, we have to touch upon one subject, and it's a little bit sensitive, but we need to put it on the table. And my question is, if the current clampdown on China tech in the US, is it driven by real issues when it comes to security, or is it because US is realizing that China tech is becoming too good and too dominant? What is it in your mind? What's the reason for this?
Well, I think that, every country tap on every country intelligence. So nothing new, am I right to say that? But of course at the same time that, as you know, that I personally feel that this very much is a political games on doing that. And like what I say, every country tap on every country. What is the difference? We also get tapped by Google's, we also get tapped by Facebook, all those things. Am I right to say that? So it's not something new, to be frank. It's just what else can they do on that? The threat is there, the technology, as you mentioned, 5G right now, Huawei, the China company, is the one who are the #1 player over here, and they are spread everywhere. I think that a lot of our gadget is with them. So this is something. AI, another thing, mobile payment, Chinese, they born at mobile era. So unlike us who are early adopter from PC, from desktop. So, and right now, nobody can live without mobile phone. So this is their advantages. So I believe it's very much into the personal gain, into politician. At the same time, there's the threat of the technology that right now China is faster in the sense because Chinese are much more hungry. I would say that.
We had one question coming in from one participant, and I just had to read it out the way I received it here. And that's relating to what we discussed on Super App and Wechat being very Chinese centric. And the comment and the question is, agreed that this is very Chinese in the way of spending over earning potential. Super apps integrating different services under one umbrella. Isn't this taking shape slowly? Also, a lot of Asian countries do think similarly, and they seem to enjoy the Chinese apps that are available here. So the question is basically that he or she sees that the Chinese super apps is also getting traction amongst other Asian countries. Who wanna answer that one?
Seems like I got to answer this, right?
Yep.
Okay. I think it's a consumer behavior that you like to be very convenient. This is why we have mobile phone. This is why the development of mobile payment, 5G, all this, what are we talking about? We are talking about convenience. So if you can use one app to do everything, instead of change here, change there, and now you get lost. Do you think super app is good? Of course it's good. And but again, WeChat super app is very Chinese, like what the audience saying, So maybe in future, just like you look at Grab itself, Grab Singapore right now, they are no longer just do riding, all right? They do Grab food, and they're having a digital finance zone. Am I right to say that? Justin. So that's a lot of things. So you see, this is a consumer behavior. This is a consumer. Every country, they would like to have all-in-one things because it's a consumer behavior to do that. So I think that's very normal. But were WeChat able to leverage on that to go to other country? Yes, more or less. Just look at Indonesia. Wechat, I'm not sure how well you're familiar with Wechat, but I believe our dear friend Jochi know about Wechat, right? Wechat in Indonesia, they are not just doing what you call it, riding sharing. They do a lot of things just like in China. They are just like WeChat. And look at the platform, the interface, all these things. You do a comparison, you'll know that the technology come from where? It's come from WeChat. Why? Because Tencent is one of the stakeholders, one of the major stakeholders over there. They are not just putting funding over there. They also transfer their technology over there. But they don't call themselves WeChat. They call Wechat because this is much more localized. People can accept better due to people always worry about Chinese, Chinese product, China product, that some people may don't like it and worry about tech on their data, all those kind of things. Hope I answer your question.
Yeah, that answered the question. So, Joachim, you have seen winners and losers in the process, right? You see companies that succeed and the ones that don't really succeed. But within the fintech development, there will be a battle. A lot of capital goes into the ongoing developments. Do you foresee or think that fintech is still in its infancy and that it will take over more of the functions that we normally get from other institutions? Or how will traditional banks integrate with what you are offering long term? How do you see that?
So let me just touch on what Warren was mentioning there before I answer that question. So when comparing WeChat to the likes of Gojek and Grab, I think they share a similar kind of trajectory. They all started gaining massive customer base through a hero use case. For WeChat, that was messaging and communication. For both Gojek and Grab, that was first and foremost ride hailing. So they had a hero use case to attract customers, which solved the real need in the population, right? You can all agree that all of those problems are problems that needed solving. And once you have that massive customer base, you can start expanding, right? Which is what WeChat did very early. And then there are other super apps which have kind of followed some of the same path and taken some learnings from that, right? So I think the key takeaway there that Warren was kind of getting into was that you don't start out as a super app. That's not a thing. You start out with solving a real problem and gaining massive traction. So that, I think that was a good point. To answer your question on if these financial apps and super apps will take on more of the traditional banking experience, I think I would like to divide that in two things, right? So looking at China and Southeast Asia, I think there's a large population of people who aren't banked, who don't have access to what we would call traditional financial services, right? So are they imposing on the bank's business? You could argue that they aren't, because they're targeting customers that the traditional banks aren't really targeting, or they haven't built the infrastructure to reach them. So that's one aspect. And the needs of this segment of the population is probably different than like high-end retail banking customers, which have very different needs and very different ways to solve their problems, right? So once you have built out those capabilities to serve a specific customer segment, I think to go from 1 to 2 is simpler than going from 0 to 1. So I do think that these companies will start to target more traditional banking segments as well. Now, for other startups and companies and also traditional bank in the region, I think there's definitely potential to partner up and provide services through these apps, right? So one framework of looking at this is that there could be some apps, which is essentially the front end of banking, right? Which connect to a bunch of APIs and different services in the back end. And that financial service institution can provide those services through the front end consumer facing apps. And I think we'll see some more of that moving forward.
Thank you. Frederick, it is increasingly difficult to predict the future. We have now seen a massive change taking place within all industries. As the Microsoft CEO highlighted, we have seen 2 years worth of digitalization during initial 2 months of COVID. These are changes we normally would experience during a 2-year period. which new functions and opportunities will emerge within FinTech and possibly within super apps that leaders of organizations should be aware of as the possible mega trends into the future? Because I believe that in Forrester you also try to predict what the future is going to look like. How do you see this?
Yeah, so I think first from a FinTech perspective, I think the period is relatively difficult. I mean, it's difficult for everybody, but I think especially for FinTech that are in search for profitability, the current situation, COVID-19, is coming at a worse time, and we see a number of FinTechs that are that have to fight harder for deposits, have to fight harder for new account signups, and in many cases it's it's the first time that a lot of these companies are facing a crisis like that, right? So I think it's it's going to be difficult for a number of these companies. Some will fail. Some, I think, there will be also few exit strategies possible. I think we can expect a number of them to start and pivot, and Joachim, talked about that as well in terms of, focusing on being a back-end service provider to some banks, for instance. So through partnerships and making some of the services available through APIs, there's definitely something, because the B2C strategy might be a little bit more difficult to where it would be a bit more difficult for them to be successful in that. So you're going to see example like Fedor, for instance, and others, Monzo, Moven, who have pivoted from a B2C strategy to a B2B strategy. So I think we're going to see more initiatives like that. But I think in terms of the innovations that we can expect, the fintechs will still have an advantage over the banks, which is, they are obsessing about innovation, right? And they're obsessing about speed around customer financial needs, and that gives them a very strong advantage over the banks. I mean, the banks are getting better, the incumbents are getting better at it, but I still think that the fintechs have an important role to play to come up with innovation. And this innovation is going to come across a number of areas. We talked about digital payments. I think there's still a lot of work to be done here in terms of making these payments, seamless and also invisible. So enabling, truly friction-free type of experiences for customers. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I think there's also a key opportunity around financial well-being, especially in this current situation where you have many customers, and especially those that are living paycheck to paycheck with no financial cushion. They see their financial health seriously impacted these days. So they need support. They need help from their financial services providers, and that could be fintech as well, to guide them through this difficult period. And others, still need planning advice as well. How do you plan for the education of your kids, or how do you plan for retirement? Very few banks are doing a good job there, quite frankly. So I think that's another key opportunity for fintech to develop innovative solutions that are truly customer-centric and that are helping them achieve financial well-being.
So if you were the CEO of a bank, and you have highlighted a few points where they should be better, what would you do as a first stepping stone? Because I know you always think about the customer first and how to be more customer centric, but what would be the first thing on your agenda if you're the CEO and you open up your board meeting and say, this is what needs to be done, which is not being done by the banks now?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of things that are being done by the banks right now. But one major obstacle that there is with many banks right now again, they have invested in transforming their culture to make them more customer centric, to make them more collaborative, to make them more open as well. So developing digital ecosystems. This is something that we've seen across Asia, but across the world as well. But I think one of the key stumbling blocks, I guess, that still exists, and it's a massive problem that few banks have tackled so far, is the core systems, the legacy systems that have been implemented 10, 15, 20 years or more, and that are really getting in the way of banks' vision to create experiences that are truly differentiated and experiences that are really helping their customers, achieve their personal goals, their personal financial well-being goals. And on the back of that, I would say also add to the fact that banks tend to still think in a product-centric way. I think they've done, I think they've done a good job at developing omni-channel strategies. So they don't think in channel-centric ways anymore, for the most part. But they still think pretty much in terms of product-centric. So thinking about checking accounts or savings accounts or credit cards, and so on and so on. When clients and customers really need to think about, give me a solution that brings me closer to my financial goals. I don't care what product it is, but I need to be, making progress towards this goal. And very few banks actually have that mindset, have that approach. So I think that would be the key focus area for this discussion at the board level.
Thank you, Frederick. So I think, Berit, if you look at the banking system in Norway, a lot of the banks really had foresight and did a really good work when it comes to digitalization at the early stage, as it is with DNB. But how do you see it, the differences in the geographical approaches that Frederick is mentioning? Do you see the same things in Norway and in Europe, or is it very different?
I agree with Frederick. I think the banks in Europe, they need to be much more customer centric. If they don't care about the customers in a better way, I think they will lose out the financial transactions when they are being converted from cash over to digital transactions, because they will not, having the right customer relationship. Other players will come in from US, from other parts, and starting to digitize this at a very high speed. And first they will lose transactions, and after a while they will start to lose a part of customer savings, and that will hurt even more. And when you also take customer savings, you can also provide credit and get a banking license, and then they will really start to hurt when they scale up. So I think, the banks in Europe, in the Nordics, they are much more advanced, but in the rest of Europe, they have a window of opportunity to turn around. If not, the big players, the big tech players, they will grow even more. They have had a huge growth during the COVID-19 crisis. It's still there. They will continue to grow. FinTech companies are there. The European banks will get into trouble, excluded the Nordics, because they have been much more advanced, if they don't turn around and do something. And I think Vipps, we will have an approach that we can help the banks to take care of these things, take care of the customers in a better way, take care of the digitization in the country with a bank-friendly approach. So I think we have a window of opportunity, but the banks in Europe, they also have a window of opportunity to turn around. If not, they will lose a lot, I think, going forward. But I also think that FinTech going into banking services is one thing. You can either be bank-friendly or bank-unfriendly. But we will also see approaches that they are going into other areas. And I think, that is also exciting to think about, because there are a lot more that can be done based on the assets that the FinTechs are sitting on.
Thank you, Joachim. I'm curious to hear your take on this, because you're in the middle here. Both Now you got the Singapore and the Norwegian version. How do you see it?
Yeah, so I think the fintechs definitely come with an advantage over the traditional banks generally. So like Frederick was into, the legacy systems for the traditional banks are going to be a hurdle. I worked on legacy systems and also worked with newer, more modern cloud-based systems, and it's a big difference in scalability and how quickly you can go to market depending on the level of legacy in your stack. So that's definitely a disadvantage to the traditional banks. I think for the main challengers in Europe, I think we're probably going to see the likes of Revolut and 26 months. So they're going to create a huge splash in the market there. I think they already are in certain cases. I think they're also expanding globally, if not in all markets and all countries. They are not containing themselves to Europe. I think, as Frederick mentioned way earlier, perhaps the concept of a global fintech is not something we have apart from like Rails, Swift, the MasterCard, Visa, and companies like those. But I think we'll start to see a bit more of it. I think there's some examples as well. The Stripes and Revolut of the world are also definitely going out there, winning customers in markets that are very different from their markets, like home markets of the Netherlands and the US, right? So I think we are seeing it already, and I think it's going to accelerate moving forward. So my money would be on the fintechs capturing a large piece of that market moving forward.
Thank you. David, I want to touch upon one thing, and that's the super apps again, because we've seen the big traction in Asia, right? The big user volumes here, but it hasn't really taken off in Norway and in Europe. And why is that? Is it because nobody have developed something that really can take off, or is it because the user habits are so very different?
You know, I think if you look at super apps, there are obvious advantages both for the users. The users don't have to onboard on all the different apps that we have in Europe. You know, it's kind of your mobile phone is full of apps, and some of them you are not using at all. Some you are using a little, and some you are using a lot. But to onboard a new one, you have to do all the time, and that's quite cumbersome for the users. For the businesses, you know, to take care of their own apps, to maintain, develop it, to distribute it and get the distribution, and to provide, if they are doing e-commerce or things like this, both digital ID and payments on top, is also very, very hard. So these are the advantages of using a super app. And then why hasn't it taken off? I think, you know, the super app is collecting a lot of data about the customer. Not only the super app, but all the mini apps inside the super app. That is taking house inside to get the distribution power, the ease of use for customers. They don't have to maintain their own app. But the users may be a little bit reluctant to give away their privacy in terms of more convenience in Europe. I think that is one thing. And the other thing is that in Norway, you know, all the businesses, they are so aware of having their own app. It's very difficult to discuss with business users in Norway if they are not on the front end on the mobile phone and have their own app. So I think it's a culture also among the business customers that they should have it because they want to be visible. So it's more driven maybe by the marketing departments in the companies that haven't seen the advantage yet of taking on a bigger app and get the exact distribution. So I think in the West, we will probably see other type of solutions. We will see more that players are coming together in more partnership, value chain partnerships, and in e-commerce space that it will be much easier. It's a lot to do there. Login needs to be easier, to register needs to be easier. That can be done automatically. Payment and checkout can also be done much more automatically today, and delivery is still a big pain for many companies. And you know, if you are not satisfied with what you are getting, to get the goods back to the vendor. So there is a lot to do, and I think we will see a lot of development in this space in the coming months, because Amazon, as you are aware of, are coming into the Nordic countries, and it's very, very exciting. And it's already a lot happening in Germany, which is not so digital with Amazon. So I think, FinTech is one of the most exciting places to work within, because there are so much dynamics. There are so many opportunities, but you need to grab them.
So I have one question coming in, and it was quite a lengthy one, but I'll try to shorten it down a bit. And it goes on security. The banking industry spends a lot of money on compliance and security elements within their solutions. Is that the same with super app developers, Joachim? How do you scale and put level of security levels on your development?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Berit had a good point earlier that some consumers might be a bit more opposed to sharing data. I think that problem is solved by creating user trust, right? So if you can prove time and time again that you value your relationship with the customer, and you don't misuse that, you will definitely be able to get them to sign on more services. That's my view. But of course, compliance is extremely important. That's something you need to focus on. That's table stakes for any financial company, right? You can't do business without it. If you aren't focusing on compliance and regulatory issues, you won't survive, right? Because it's just table stakes. You need to focus on it. In terms of security, I think FinTech has a slight advantage compared to older infrastructure, legacy infrastructure, in that on-premise servers, you need a team of security experts, while most modern FinTechs deploy their products in the cloud. So, I mean, how many security experts does Google have or Amazon Cloud have, right? Hundreds, probably thousands even, right? Who are maintaining that security on behalf of all of the customers on the platform. So I think in terms of comparing security on legacy stacks and new stacks, I think the FinTechs on the new stacks comes out ahead, actually.
So Warren, we have to go back a little bit to China, because China is such an important part in this puzzle. And yep. For those of us living in Asia, we see China's ambitions when it comes to the tech development, and it's truly remarkable and, in my opinion, unstoppable when you look at the ambition level and the amount of money going into developing tech from China. Do you think it's possible in the future that China will come up with a solution that will be globally accepted? Will they be able to do that, or is it a mission impossible for them?
Technically, yes, but the culture is very different. So like what I mentioned earlier on, it's very hard for the Chinese to adapt outside of China kind of culture and the way they do things. So I would say that it's nothing to do with technical things. It's very much into culture, the way, the consumer behavior, the way they do things. All right, and I speak to a lot of mainland Chinese very often because it's part of my job. And they are very much prioritized on their own local market because their local market itself is big enough. So in fact, most of them prefer to stay at their own world, at their own country. So they are not really that ambitious to conquer the world, like what a lot of outside people thought of. In fact, it's not, And when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, I think this is a common topic that everybody know about it. Why this happened? This happened is the leaders feel that the Chinese, they are very much still at their own world in China itself. They're fighting with each other, compete, they get much more better, but it's always within their own market. So Belt and Road Initiative also allowed Chinese to get out. So in fact, this is also one step that the Chinese government do that want to push up that, to let the Chinese business people, the IT, the FinTech, to know what is outside world. My feedback to a lot of my clients, because my job is very much to connect the local business people to the Chinese and vice versa. So I'm a middleman. So my general feedback is always the same. The Chinese always feel that whatever country they go, they are too slow. Everything to them is slow. Why these people are so slow? All these people are so slow. And they do not really willing to slow down the Chinese itself. They forgot that there's a culture difference, you see. So to the locals, they feel that they're very stressed because when dealing with Chinese, these people are so fast. They are too fast, they are too fast, they are too fast. So technology part, no problem. But the ambitious were not able to deliver unless the Chinese willing to respect local culture, to be localized, And this is always a challenge to them.
Yeah, I would, if I may, I would, you know, kind of disagree on this one. I mean, it's true that from a B2C perspective, there's very few. I mean, there's only one case of success, right? It's TikTok. That's the only one, and the only company that had the success outside of China. And I think that BAT firms, so you know, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and others are JD are very highly aware of this difficulties from a business to consumer perspective. But one thing I think is going to happen is that if you look at Ping An technology, One Connect, if you look at Alibaba Cloud, Aliyun, they are getting into the B2B route. Sorry. So I think that's a different business model, a different strategy that they are taking to expand outside of China. And they've been relatively successful in Southeast Asia so far. So I think it's an interesting trend to follow, I think.
So far, when we look at the BAT sales story, that Alibaba is doing well. The rest of the company, to my knowledge, they are still not so doing very well compared to Alibaba groups. This is how I feel. Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to mention two practical things. We have a survey coming up shortly, so keep a lookout for that. And we have a webinar coming up on the 20th of August, which is a follow-up to this webinar, focusing on the startup potentials within FinTech. But I want to touch upon it a little bit when it comes to the startups, and I'll go to you, Joachim. So say that you are at the barbecue party and you have a founder coming up to you, and he want to get a bit of advice from you. He have a bit of money in the pocket, and he got a tech team, and he or she want to develop something new within FinTech. What would you say in confidence? Well, now it's no longer in confidence, it's to all of us, but where is the opportunity that nobody really have tapped upon yet?
Wow, great question. I think there's a bunch of opportunities that hasn't been tapped yet, right? So if you start talking to your potential customers and markets and figuring out what they're struggling with, I think you will find a bunch of problems that still needs to be solved. I think in the B2B business space, particularly in Asia and Southeast Asia, there's a lot of opportunity. There are a bunch of merchants around who need services, financial services, ways to manage their stores and shops better, right? There's a bunch of opportunity there. Another one that I think is interesting, especially in Southeast Asia, is subscription economy. We touched upon like shipping and logistics and last mile logistics earlier. That's been super important for the e-commerce market around the world and in Europe and the US, and that's also growing here. But there's a whole segment of the economy that's subscription based, and I think that in a market with a less carded population, subscriptions become an issue, and I'm sure there's potential to solve that problem, which is a peculiar problem, which you don't really have in Norway and Europe and the US in the same way. And I'm sure there's a bunch of others as well. So if you start out with solve a real problem and expand from there, would be my very general advice. Okay.
Anyone else that have some advice for keen founders? Berit, how do you see the Nordic market? Where are the opportunities for founders right now operating within FinTech?
I think there are a lot of opportunities, because if you look at the e-commerce, is growing between 10 and 20% year over year. The FinTech industry is growing. It's a lot of what I call intermediaries, which I haven't seen in any industries before. Their value chains are so complex. There are sitting vendors in the middle of the value chain, getting in a lot of money. There are so many bottlenecks that can be solved in a much better way. But I will ask the founder, what is the real problem to be sold towards the customers? And then he has to simplify all the way through the value chain, because you have to start with the customer. That would be my advice. And I think there are a lot of opportunities in the Nordics right now. The COVID-19 has created so much more digitization. It's one of the most advanced countries in the world. There can be much more cooperation between businesses. B2B, we haven't covered so much. It's a lot to do here, and there are opportunities.
Thank you. Frederick, if I could ask you a little bit, you are as we have uncovered, focused on customer obsession. If you could give a bit of advice to the FinTech developers themselves and being even more customer obsessed, what advice would you give them?
I think, as Joachim said, I think the FinTech are already pretty customer obsessed, right? I mean, they tend to develop their value proposition, the technology-enabled value proposition around a single or a limited number of customer problems, and that's what give them their strength and differentiation in the market. So I don't think I would have too much to teach these FinTech entrepreneurs, I think.
So say that we meet again in 3 years from today, and we're gonna then look at the world the way it looks, both banking and FinTech. How will the setting be? Who would have emerged and who would have had problems on the journey?
Yeah, so I think as I said, some of the FinTech will have a hard time. The ones that were, chasing profitability, will definitely have a harder time in the current environment. I'm still slightly on the edge in terms of who's going to win in this battle, this FinTech battle in between the incumbents and the FinTech. I think it's going to be, for me, it's going to really depend on the country that you're talking about, right? I mean, if you look at China, payments and even money markets, for instance, I mean, that's pretty much owned by the technology companies, right? And the banks have lost the battle there. There's no way they can come back. If you look at one question that is interesting to ask, and that's one of the questions that we have in our surveys, is around, would you trust as a consumer to manage your money or to help you manage your money? And if you ask Singaporeans, for instance, or people in Hong Kong, banks, that's the only, I mean, not the only ones, but banks still have distrust, right? But if you look at Indonesia, if you look at Thailand, if you look at Malaysia, then payments providers have a very good opportunity to earn that trust. The challenge that I see for these companies and super apps in general is profitability again. None of them are profitable. They hold a lot of ambitions to create value proposition, especially in financial services, and that's why a number of them are pursuing these digital banking licenses to reach that level of profitability. But it's going to be a difficult situation. Difficult, I mean, challenging, not difficult, challenging road for them, especially that they are under a lot of pressure. I'm just thinking about the timelines, the number of years it took Ant Financial to create Alipay, and then to move from Alipay into money market funds and into insurance. Every step of the way, they had earned the trust of the customers, and that trust and the data, as you said earlier, enable them to move to the adjacent possible. What's happening with Gojek and Grab these days is that they are in a super short time frame, and they need to do everything at the same time, and that makes it extremely difficult for them. Jury's still out. I'm not saying that they will not succeed. That's not the point. But I think it's going to be a very difficult journey for them.
Thank you for the word of wisdom, Frederick. That was very good, and it comes to a close. And on behalf of NBUS, I thank Berit, Joachim, Warren, and Frederick for a very good discussion. I think we have been able to uncover quite a bit within 60 minutes. So I thank you all for that. And we thank DNB again for being our sponsor. And if you want to know more about Forrester, then you reach out to Frederick, and I'm sure he'll be happy to assist. And I just want to mention the survey that is now out. Please answer it if you have time. And join us again on the 20th of August when we have a follow-up webinar, then more focusing on the opportunities for startups within FinTech. So with that, thank you so much. And if you want to know more about NBUS, log into nbus.org.sg and sign up on the newsletters.
Thank you, Reinhard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.